Have you ever been on the Finding Nemo Submarine voyage at Disneyland? It's a fine enough ride, one that feels dated with the Finding Nemo IP shoehorned into it, but nothing too offensive. I think that many people pine for the old original Submarine voyage that opened there in 1959, and many others remember the 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea version, which opened 2 weeks after Magic Kingdom did, recycling much of the same experience, but now with a somewhat different theme. Both of these older versions of the ride are remembered fondly, but for many, the enclosed, poorly ventilated subs triggered a sense of claustrophobia. Having been on the Finding Nemo version, I personally haven't had this issue, but I know for many, this ride can be downright terrifying, with people feeling stuck in an enclosed vehicle with no way to exit until the ride finishes its roughly 12-minute cycle. That brings me to the main topic of this video, an intense submarine simulator that truly puts your claustrophobia to the test, in what is certainly one of the world's most unique ride experiences. However, before we get to this main topic, I wanted to highlight something very different, but still quite interesting. You might have happened to catch my video from last year on the Astroliner, one of the world's earliest simulator attractions that predated even Star Tours. But a comment from a channel viewer named Wythenstone brought up another early simulator at Silver Dollar City. Known as Rube Dugan's Diving Bell, this attraction operated from 1977 through 1984, and as park guests walked up to the entrance on Lake Silver, they would enter a wooden structure. However, if you looked out onto the lake, you would see the submersible, which helped sell the illusion. And boarding the attraction itself, guests were enclosed in a small room that seated roughly 40 people, with 5 different theaters that could operate to meet capacity demands. While details are scarce, the story of the attraction involved Captain Rube Dugan, who invented the diving bell you're using to find lost silver in an underwater cave. The actual simulator itself depicted this journey through a projection on the other side of a window, and the theater was capable of a light degree of movement. Rube Dugan was voiced by Louis Burton Lindley, an actor better known by the alias of Slim Pickens, but the actual ride itself was operated by a park attendant playing the role of one of his nephews, all of which were named Junior. They would pull levers during the course of the attraction, simulating the idea of diving, and resulting in misfortune where riders would get sprayed with water as if the diving bell was springing leaks. I can find very little information about the content of the ride, but I want to thank Wythenstone for providing a bit of operational context. I figured while this attraction is poorly documented and only a few photos survive, it was worth mentioning as one of the world's earliest simulators, and fits the theme of this video, taking a look specifically at attractions themed to submarines. However, the main ride I wanted to highlight in this video seems genuinely terrifying, so please leave a like, subscribe if you haven't already, and let's dive into an intense claustrophobic nightmare that makes even the Disney subs look spacious. The next attraction brings us to Movieland Park, Italy, which opened in 2003 as part of the studio park craze throughout the 90s and early 2000s. It's very clearly inspired by Disney's Hollywood Studios and Universal's parks, even opening its own studio bus tour attraction in 2024 as a knockoff of the Universal Tram Tour. However, the attraction I want to focus on opened in 2006. It was based on the Universal World War II film from 2000, known as U-571. I'm surprised that Movieland was able to acquire the rights to adapt this film into an attraction, but known by the same name as the film, park guests would first find themselves at an industrial building reminiscent of a barracks. To board the attraction, they moved through a short queue that was decorated with military props and were soon let into a show building designed to look like a German submarine base. As riders stood around the dock, ride attendants posing as military instructors yelled out safety instructions as if it was a military briefing, and suddenly, audio of overhead planes would play as if the base was under attack. An alarm then goes off as the ride attendants run for cover, and as the planes get closer, they shoot and drop bombs to target the sub, resulting in water splashing up onto riders. As the attack continues, riders are herded onto the sub, and descending down a staircase, they walk through what appears to be crew quarters. It actually looks like there's a fair amount of detail put in here, and after walking past a small dining table, riders enter a round chamber where they are seated on a bench. U571 was mentioned in the comments from my Astroliner video by a channel viewer named Sunjai. And what was interesting about this attraction is that the ride system is in fact a recycled Astroliner hidden inside the submarine. I found a good photo on the Dark Ride database that shows what this looks like from outside of the show building, and it's really interesting to see how a relatively cheap simulator associated with traveling fairs made its way into a unique special effects attraction like this. The original Astroliner used here actually used to be located at Gardaland, just a 5-minute drive away, with the attraction known as Astroline Saturn VII, running from 1979 and through 1987. Once it closed, it was used as a prop in the park until 1994, where it was then put into storage and was later sold to Movieland Park in 2005. Returning back to U571, riders have now boarded the simulator, and as the door seals, the ride experience begins as you hear bombs dropping into the water. I'm unclear on if these bombs are from planes or from depth charges dropped by a German destroyer like in the movie, but either way, the simulator rotates side to side, challenging riders to stay on the bench using only handrails. As the situation gets worse, and the sub can be heard groaning under pressure as it dives, water jets suddenly soak riders as if the hull has burst, and along with startling air jets, simulates peril in this confined, claustrophobic space. The actual ride portion lasts roughly 3 minutes, and on conclusion, riders are let out a different door into the exit. What fascinates me about this ride is its relative simplicity, dressing up a fair ride and turning it into a cinematic experience. It's not perfect, and sometimes doesn't make sense, because how are planes shooting into an enclosed bunker? But the experience is so interesting through its unique execution that it's easy to overlook its flaws. U571 closed in 2024, but reopened the following year as K6, the Royal Intelligence Agency. Based loosely on the Kingsman films, as it seems that the park could not secure licensing for the IP, the experience is similar, but takes you on a British spy mission with updated effects, including screens in the simulator that I think probably help it feel just a bit less claustrophobic. While I wish I could have experienced U571 because it seemed more intense with its World War II theme, I'm still glad that the ride system exists and that the experience isn't too radically different. So that's what I wanted to talk about because it seems like such an interesting ride. But since the video is themed to submarines, I have some really neat bonus attractions I would like to highlight before we conclude. While Magic Kingdom's 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea attraction would close in 1994, the theme of the ride did make a revival at Tokyo Disney Sea when it opens with the park in 2001. What makes it so remarkable is that it's not underwater at all, and is instead a suspended dark ride that convincingly sells the illusion of diving. I don't want to talk about it here because it probably deserves a dedicated video someday, but I can't do a submarine ride video and not mention it. What's interesting about Disney's actual underwater subs though, is that while they are notorious for being high maintenance, which is why Magic Kingdom no longer has this attraction, and it was reluctantly rethemed to Finding Nemo to save the ride in Disneyland, this actual ride type is more common than I initially thought, and there have been a fair few attractions in other parks that are quite similar and even recent. The first case I can find of this is actually in the West Edmonton Mall, which contained a massive lagoon that was home to a recreation of Christopher Columbus's Santa Maria, as well as a sizable aquarium. However, the aquarium was built with a ride, the Deep Sea Adventure, which allowed people to travel the lagoon in submarines. Operating from 1985 and through 2005, the journey took riders through fantastical underwater sets and allowed unique views into tanks of the aquarium, cleverly hidden to make it seem as if live animals were right outside of the portholes of the subs. I would say that's pretty innovative, as even Disney never had actual animals in theirs. The West Edmonton Mall was wildly ambitious back in the day, so if you haven't seen it, I recommend checking out my Theme Parks and Entertainments Were Better in the 90s video, as I covered both this and the themed areas of the Mall of America. Moving on, various Legoland parks have a submarine ride, known as Deep Sea Adventure, which, unlike the ride at West Edmonton Mall, took you through a full aquarium populated with fish instead of hiding them in individual tanks. Of course, there is a fun LEGO flair to this with set pieces made from actual bricks, but while the layout seems to be the same across various Legoland parks, the sets do seem to differ slightly depending on the region they're in. The first version of the ride opened at Legoland Windsor in 2011, it was then followed by Dubai in 2016, Japan in 2017, and then Legoland California in 2018. In 2023, China's Chimelong International Ocean Tourist Resort opened the Chimelong Spaceship, the world's largest aquarium. Of course, it has its own submarine attraction called Dive the Abyss Submarine Journey, taking you through a massive tank filled with live fish. Something notable to point out here are sections where you encounter deep sea organisms and even a giant squid, achieved through what are either projection effects or underwater screens. They are maybe not as exciting as the squid encounter in the Disney subs, but still pretty cool. Finally, another Chinese theme park opened in 2022 as Fantasy Valley, and in addition to its own massive aquarium, it predictably has its own submarine ride known as Deep Sea Exploration Dragon Tour. I assume it's named this because of the dragons carved into the underwater pillars, but otherwise, it's just a pretty standard tour around this massive tank. However, the ride vehicle itself is the largest sub-ride I've ever seen. It is notably spacious, so maybe that could alleviate any concerns about claustrophobia. The point of this video was really to focus on U571, as it's just such an incredibly unique idea for a ride. It was notably high budget for just recycling an Astroliner simulator, but I thought it would be interesting to throw in other submarine attractions as well. From Rube Dugan's Diving Bell, which has very little surviving documentation, and to these various submarine knockoffs of the Disneyland subs, this video yielded more interesting information than I initially anticipated that it would. If you made it here to the end and found this shorter video interesting, I would appreciate it if you left a like to help boost this more obscure subject. I'm also pretty close to hitting a new subscriber milestone, so if you would like to help me boost that number higher, you can also subscribe and hit the bell notification if you haven't already, so as to be alerted to new videos as they're released.